Yes, welcome everybody. So yes, just a note about GDPR. As usual, if you're familiar with the web jam, we do record this and then post it on YouTube. So if you do not want your likeness or your voice posted online, just feel free to turn off your camera. Otherwise, we do invite you to turn your camera on and have your microphone on so you can engage with the rest of us during our program. So I think we are ready to get started, Steve, yeah?
Yeah, that would be great.
All right, so let's advance the slide. And today's edition of Wednesday Web Jam is a book club by Steve about innovation capital. So we all know Steve, he's a member of the crew, and he's going to lead us through this review of this book and then have a few questions for discussion. So Steve, take it away.
Terrific. Thank you, Ezekiel. Welcome, everybody. For those of you who don't know me, I'm Steve Bozak. I'm in Washington, D.C., and I'm a consultant with Design Thinkers Group. And if you guys can mute yourselves, that would be great. I'm going to run through an overview of this book, Innovation Capital, by Jeff Dyer, Nathan Furr, and Curtis Lefrandt, and give you the top points that come out in the book, share with you some of the assessment information that they do in here about innovation capital. And if you decide you want to read it, I think it's a good book to read, but you can decide after this presentation. And we'll have some time for question and answer. And we will do the backstage as we normally do for the last half hour at the top of the hour. So we're going to dive right into what innovation capital is. There's a question: how do you get people to support your ideas and bring them to fruition? The reason I thought this book was interesting is because we deal a lot with facilitation and creative collaboration on this Wednesday Web Jam. A lot of us are helping people do innovation and sharing ideas and advancing ideas and making them human-centered. I don't think we've dealt as much with how you take an idea and actually implement it. You get it from the prototype stage through testing and then implemented to the market. And that could be a project or a service or a process or a product. So what you need to get support for your ideas and bring them to fruition is innovation capital. And that is the ability to win resources and support for your ideas. And the three authors who wrote this book have done a lot of research on innovation. They have a consulting company on innovation. They've interviewed a lot of great innovators, a lot of business leaders who are known as innovation leaders. And they've found a number of common themes in those people's characteristics and backgrounds and practices. So we're going to go through what all those things are that make up innovation capital. Oops, sorry. So if you want to have innovation capital, you need people to believe that you have human capital, social capital, and reputation capital. So human capital is personal skills to succeed at implementing an innovation project. Social capital is the ability to bring others and the resources that you need to that project. And reputation capital is the reputation and track record of innovation. So people will know you as an innovator. So first, I want to dive into human capital. Many of you have probably heard about, you're probably familiar with Thomas Edison, the inventor who created the light bulb. He was considered a great innovator, but also he had a lot of innovation capital. And I want to contrast him with someone like Nikola Tesla, who's also known as a great innovator, really a genius in the early 20th century, who invented alternating current, among other things, and introduced that as a way to transmit electricity and power your homes. So Edison was known for being a great experimenter. He prototyped a lot. He did a lot of testing. But one of the things that he really excelled at once he had an idea that was ready to launch is going out and getting people to support him. JP Morgan is one of the great financiers of the early 20th century. There's now a company called JP Morgan, an investment bank and commercial bank. Edison went to JP Morgan, told him about electrification, and then actually electrified JP Morgan's house in New York City. It was I think the first house to be electrified in Manhattan when Edison came up with electrification. He also went to the Vanderbilts, other powerful, wealthy New York families who weren't necessarily known as investors, but they were, railroad families or oil families. And he got them to give him resources because they got excited about his ideas. One of the things that he was known for is when he had a new invention, he would walk over to the offices of the periodical for Scientific American. And you might have read Scientific American now. They preview a lot of new ideas and breaking technologies. So Edison would demonstrate his new products or inventions for the Scientific American staff. And then the whole staff would write about it in a issue. They'd spend a whole issue writing about his invention. So he would get people really excited about his ideas, and he'd get help in promoting them. Nikola Tesla, on the other hand, while he was known as a brilliant investor, he didn't have the same skill at bringing people onto his side. He did have co-founders and colleagues who helped him launch companies, but he soon got frozen out of those companies. He actually died relatively poor. When you look at the impact of his inventions and how much they mean to society now, it's kind of amazing that he wasn't considered as much of a success in his time, because he didn't have that social networking ability. He didn't have that ability to bring others onto his side and make them believe in what his products could do or his inventions could do. So that's just an example of somebody having, two minds who were equally brilliant and inventive, but one had innovation capital and the other did not. And Edison is the one who was incredibly successful in his time at getting his inventions implemented. Tesla did get a lot of his inventions implemented. However, a lot of that was done by other people, and he did not benefit directly from that. So that's just an example of, what social capital, human capital can do for you. So how do you create human capital? You need to be forward thinking, and you need to be very good at creative problem solving, persuasion, and promotion. And these are things that a lot of great innovators have. And I'm going to go give you an example of that. Oh, look at that. Parts of this slide didn't load. For some reason, the next slide is not loading. And I don't know, looks like we lost a slide there. So I'm going to explain what the next slide was going to be. Many of you probably have heard of Satya Nadella, who is the current CEO of Microsoft. Satya Nadella is highlighted in the book Innovation Capital as an innovation leader. So even though he joined Microsoft in the late 80s, after Microsoft, Bill Gates had launched Microsoft, it was a very successful company. Satya Nadella was one of thousands of computer science guys who joined Microsoft in the late 80s. He went to a good school, University of Wisconsin, but it wasn't one of the leading computer science schools. It wasn't Stanford, it wasn't MIT, it wasn't one of the schools known for sending people into these big innovative tech businesses. And then what he did when he got to Microsoft is he chose to work on something called Windows NT. Does anybody remember Windows NT? Yes, a couple. Michael does. So
I think you're in the slide of how do you create human capital.
Pardon me?
Are you still on the same slide of how do you create human capital?
I am on that slide because the next slide is missing. The next slide is blank. So the slide that I need is blank. So I'm going to stay here for a bit. Satya Nadella chose Windows NT, and the hot business at the time was OS, right? Operating systems. Steve Ballmer, who was the CEO of Microsoft in the late 80s, early 90s, actually said to Satya Nadella, look, you might want to think twice about staying in Windows NT because this whole business could crash and burn. It might not end up being anything. And Satya Nadella could see the future. He realized that cloud computing and network connected computers were going to be a big thing. So when Microsoft started to move into the cloud, everybody came to him for his skills and knowledge that he had developed running Windows NT. It was a project or a business within Microsoft that was maybe worth a couple $1 million, but now you have Microsoft Azure, you have a whole cloud computing business, and Satya Nadella, because he knew about that, he's become the CEO of Microsoft. So that's an example of forward thinking, being a few steps ahead. Elon Musk, who you all probably know is the CEO of Tesla and also the founder of SpaceX, he is known as a forward thinker, obviously. He wants to make sustainable transportation. He wants to re-envision the way we move about and use energy. His brother, Elon Musk's brother, has said, if you think of a chess grandmaster, grandmasters can think 12 moves ahead in all the different permutations when they look at a chessboard. That's what Elon Musk can do. He can think 12 moves ahead in multiple directions and think about what technology is going to enable and what people are going to want in the future. And that's one of the things that helps you build that human capital for innovation. So now I'm going to skip through these blank slides, and I'm going to get to this quiz for assessing human capital. Now, I hope that all of you have a pen and a piece of paper. It can be a Post-it, but can everybody grab a pen and a piece of paper? Because I'm going to ask you to take a little quiz to assess your human capital. Great, I see that. Great. Okay, so here is how you're going to score yourself. So you're going to have to add up a couple different numbers. The scoring scale is like this. 1 is strongly disagree. 2 and 3 are obviously still disagree, but lesser levels of disagreement. 4 is neutral, neither disagree or agree with a statement. And 7 is strongly agree. So 7 is the top number, 1 is the bottom. You can score anywhere along the scale in between 1 or 7, knowing that 4 is neutral. Okay, so now I'm going to give you a couple statements that you're going to write down whether you agree or disagree with and how strongly. So the first statement is, I can see what is really important before others do. Do you strongly disagree with that, which is a 1? Do you neither disagree nor agree, which is a 4? Or do you strongly agree with that, which is a 7? And obviously you can use other numbers in there to score yourself. So that's for question 1, how do you score yourself? Okay, the next statement to score yourself on is, I actively engage in activities that help me understand the latest customer and technology trends. So are you actively doing something to make sure you understand where customer needs and wants are going and where technology is going? And lastly, I regularly take time to think deeply about how changes in customer preferences and emerging new technologies will influence business opportunities. So that's regularly. And to give you an example of that, Bill Gates, when he was leading Microsoft, and I think still to this day, would take a week a year that he would call Think Week. And he would remove himself from the workplace. He would have a couple of books that he would read, and he would think about what are the emerging technology trends and what opportunities do they present to Microsoft? What are customer needs and demands? How are those trending right now? How do I know, or what can I see a few years out into the future, like where we should be, so that we're anticipating where the future is headed? You need to be there before other people get there. Okay, so now I'd like you guys to, before we go to the next thing, I'd like you to add up those numbers. Now you don't have to share them with me, but add up those numbers. And then This is a quiz from the book. Here's what you're going to do. If your score was 19 to 21, you're very strong at forward thinking. If your score was between 16 and 18, you're strong at forward thinking. 13 to 15, you are adequate at forward thinking. And below 13, probably lots of room for improvement. Now, I will say, I know a lot of you aren't necessarily, technology inventors or leaders, we're facilitators, but this is just something to consider about how you practice forward thinking. All right. Does anybody want to share their score? Anybody score? Let's do it this way. Anybody scored 19 to 21? Raise your hand. I didn't. I'm just raising my hand to show you. Raise your hand. No, okay. Anybody score 16 to 18? All right, Donna, Ezekiel, Michael, cool, great. I see Virginia. How about 13 to 15? All right, Hugo, Frankie. All right, great. And then below 13. Nobody wants to admit it. Okay. We're going to go on to the next element of innovation capital that they talk about in the book, which is social capital. Has anybody here ever heard of the Dunbar number? Is that a term that means that Ezekiel's heard of it? Because I told him about it yesterday. So Robin Dunbar is the person who, visualized or envisioned something called the Dunbar number. And Robin Dunbar has some training in anthropology, and this is why he came up with it. Here's what the Dunbar number is. It's the number of people you would not feel embarrassed about joining uninvited for a drink if you happen to bump into them at a bar. Now that seems kind of odd, right? Why do we have a number that's the number of people that I wouldn't mind having an uninvited drink with at a bar? Well, what it's trying to demonstrate is your social ties, right? And our brains, you've probably heard this before, our brains can handle maintaining about 150 strong social ties to people. In fact, when Dunbar came up with this number, actually when this book was written, I should say, a few years ago, the average number of friends that people have on Facebook is about 200. So it's about 50 people beyond that, limit of strong social ties that people can have. And that's important to think about, how many strong social ties you have when you're thinking about your social capital for innovation. And this is a statement that I'd like you guys to assess, knowing what we just said about strong social ties. Strong social ties are more important than weak social ties when it comes to finding out about new jobs, new information, and new ideas. Is that true or false? Can you put your answer in the chat? I got one false. Anybody else? Well, false. Frankie, yep, you are right. It is false.
But this is true.
It is false. And the reason it is false, there's a guy called Mark Granovetter. He's a professor at Stanford University who has studied this and says that weak ties are more important when it comes to finding jobs, getting introduced to new ideas or accessing new information. And that sounds counterintuitive, but it's because of network effects. Let's say you have 150 strong social ties. Well, if each of those people have 150 strong social ties, you essentially have 150 times 150 weak social ties. So you have a much larger network of weak social ties from which you can broadcast and gather information. And that's an important factor. You need to think about those networks effects when you're job hunting, searching for new ideas, new information or resources. And today with the internet, obviously that's a lot easier to do. It's a lot easier to access those weak social ties. So that it's an important part of social capital is maintaining those strong social ties and also cultivating and knowing how to use your weak social ties. Next up. So there's, how do you build social capital? You need strong and weak ties to innovators and entrepreneurs, organizational leaders, investors, influencers. Maybe there's somebody with a hot Instagram account or TikTok account who can get your idea out, or tag you if you've got an idea. And customers, obviously, you want contacts with customers. Those are connections that will help you build social capital. Okay, so everybody, Mark Zuckerberg's a great example of the weak social tie. You may have strong opinions about Mark Zuckerberg. I'm not saying he's the model ethical business citizen, but it was his weak social ties that helped him launch Facebook. He did have roommates at Harvard. I don't know if any of you've seen The Social Network. I highly recommend it as a movie. It's a great movie starring Jesse Eisenberg about the founding of Facebook. And what you can see in that movie is the example of Mark Zuckerberg meeting people that he doesn't know well, and getting ideas from them. There are these two guys called the Winklevoss twins, two upperclassmen at Harvard who originally hired Mark Zuckerberg to design a website that was sort of like Facebook, like a directory. And that gave Mark Zuckerberg the idea to basically take their idea and make something different with it, right? But he did steal their idea and actually, I think, had to settle with them in court for millions of dollars because of stealing their idea. But they were weak social ties and they gave him an idea. He met the founder of Napster. Does anybody remember Napster, that music sharing site? So he met the founder of Napster through another tie, and that guy introduced him to the founder of LinkedIn, who introduced him to Peter Thiel, who was one of the founders of eBay, is a serial entrepreneur in Silicon Valley, and he's an angel investor. It was Peter Thiel, a few connections removed from Mark Zuckerberg, who gave him his first $1 million to launch Facebook. He got smaller bits of money from some of his closer friends, but the big chunk of money came from a weak social tie that was about 3 steps removed from him. He also got a lot of technical knowledge and expertise from other weak social ties that he was introduced to by people like the founder of Napster. So it's an example of how some of these Silicon Valley founders really relied on these weak social ties to get their businesses moving. It wasn't just close friends and family. All right, Zemina, could you advance it, please? So, did you advance it? Okay, so we have another quiz coming up where I'm going to ask you to assess your social capital. So the first 3 questions are multiple choice questions. You're going to need a paper and a pen again. So get out your paper and your pen. And you're going to write down the number on the left that corresponds with your answer. Okay. So it's going to be 1 through 7, but you just write down 1, 2, 3, 4, or 7 for each question. Let's go to the first question, Zemina. So roughly how many people are in your LinkedIn or other professional network? On the low end, it's less than 100, that's a 1. And then you can see on the high end, it's more than 10,000. Look at those numbers and write down the number that corresponds with the number of people in your LinkedIn network, or maybe you have another professional network and you know the number. Okay. All right. Does everybody got that? All right, on to the next question. So strong ties. Roughly how many strong tie relationships do you have with people that you would classify as either successful innovators, organization leaders like vice presidents and up, investors, or influencers? And there are the answers. 5 or fewer on the low end at 1, and more than 100 up at 7. And look at those numbers in between. All right, we have a couple more questions. Next question is also Okay. Can you go to the next question, Savannah?
There.
Okay, proactive networking. How many hours a week do you spend networking to meet new people to bring them into your network? 1 is 1 hour or less. 7 is 7 hours, which frankly seems like a lot of time meeting new people. And then you have obviously corresponds 2 hours, 3 hours, 4 hours. So write down the number that corresponds with the number. Okay. All right. The last question is going to be a agree or disagree question. So this is a statement. One of my strengths is networking with others who can bring financial resources or other needed resources like technical knowledge to my innovation projects. You can strongly disagree with a 1. You can strongly agree with a 7. You can be neutral with a 4. All right, now we're going to add those up. If you can add up those numbers. Okay, so try to be honest. This is about helping yourself. You don't have to share this with others. And let's go to the next slide, please, Amanda. So if you scored a 26 to 28, you have very strong social capital, according to the book Innovation Capital. 23 to 25, you have strong social capital. 21 to 22, you have adequate social capital. And below 21, there's lots of room for improvement. If you want to be an innovator with social capital, you need to spend more time networking and building up that social capital. All right. We're going to go on to the next element, which is reputation capital, which I know sounds a bit like human capital, but it is a little different. Let's go to the next slide, please, Savannah. So how do you build reputation capital? This is about what you're known for in close circles and in the broader community. You want to become a founder of something. It doesn't have to be a business. The author gives an example of how he founded like a speaker series, or you could found an award program or some sort of conference. Anything that you're helping found puts you in a position where you're meeting a lot of people and you get a reputation as an organizer and a convener and somebody who makes things happen. So become a founder of something if you want to build reputation capital. Take on hard projects in wherever you are, on your own or inside an organization where you work. Be the person who raises their hand when somebody throws out this project that looks really hard and other people kind of keep their head down at the meeting table and want to be forgotten. Raise your hand and say, I'll take it on, and then work it hard and make it successful. That's a way to build your reputation capital. Next, this sounds pretty commonsensical. Know how to prioritize strategically, right? Know where you need to spend your time and where you need to deprioritize spending time, because you only have limited time and you have to spend time on the stuff that's going to build your innovation capital and get your projects done successfully. And then be scrappy. You are going to get shot down. You're going to fail. You're going to experience disappointment. You need to be able to get back up if you fail and keep trying. And a scrappy is also another way of saying you need to be good at finding resources, right? There's this example in the book. Jeff Bezos grew up going to his grandfather's farm in Texas, and his grandfather didn't have a lot of money, but he had a big farm. And so when his grandfather needed to do things like build a fence around a 40-acre field or fix a tractor or even, help birth a cow, he would read about it or try it himself. And he would try things and he'd fail and then he'd try again. But they used to buy books about how to do things. And Jeff Bezos claims that this developed his self-reliance and his ability to problem solve. He saw his grandfather willing to try things and fail and try things again until he learned how to do things. And he was very creative at solving problems and finding resources to solve those problems. It wasn't about money. It was about just finding the resources he needed to solve problems. And if you can do that in business, people will understand that you're a good problem solver, you're good at finding resources. So that's a way to build reputation capital. So we have, we have a quiz, one last quiz. This is all from the book. So here the scoring scale is again 1 to 7. You strongly disagree as a 1, you strongly agree as a 7, 4 is neither disagree or agree or disagree. And there's a little variation on that I'll go through. So let's go to the next slide, please, Ximena. Okay, sorry. Okay, so for number 1, other people are likely to vouch for my ability to lead a successful innovation project. For those of you, vouch means like people will say, yes, you know, Michael is a great leader for innovation projects, right? So 1 through 7, do you disagree 1, or do you strongly agree 7, or somewhere in the middle? Next, for 2, I am well known for tackling difficult problems and coming up with innovative solutions. Do you disagree or agree with that, and how strongly? Next is, I have a degree from a high status university. That means, I mean, in the United States, that might be an Ivy League school, an MIT, a Stanford. I think it really depends on the industry you're in, right? If you're trying to make it in tech, do you come from a school that's really well known for being a good tech school? If it's design, do you come from a school that's really known for their design program, etc.? So think about that. 4, I have worked at a company with a strong innovation reputation. So maybe you worked at an Apple or a Salesforce, or I'm not as familiar with companies abroad, but maybe, you know, Baidu. There's companies in China, there's companies in Europe, there's companies everywhere that are well known for their innovative capacity and success. And then lastly, I have started or co-founded
I think we lost Steve. Okay, folks, so it appears that we may have lost Steve due to a technical hiccup. So we're adding up our numbers. So the last question was, I have started or co-founded a number of new businesses or projects using my own original ideas. So we can write that number and then add it up, add up. So that's all right, Jimena. So we have this slide up on screen. So you can just keep answers to yourself. Oh, Steve, you're back.
Yes, sorry. I had a technological malfunction for some reason, so I apologize for that.
So it's all good. So we're just looking at the score numbers.
Yep.
So
great.
28 to 35 is very strong. 25 to 27. You have a strong innovation reputation. 22 to 24, okay reputation for innovation. Again, some room for improvement. And below 22, definitely want to work on your, there's lots of room for growth. Steve, I hand the ball back to you. You're on mute.
Okay, thanks. Sorry about that, guys. So you've scored yourself. That's reputation capital. That's obviously something that you can work on if you want to build it. If we can go to the next slide, Ximena, that would be great. Okay, the other thing that's important, if you have built all these things, if you've built social capital, if you've built human capital, if you've built reputation capital, the book talks about impression amplifiers, things that you can do to amplify all those elements of capital that you have.
Steve, can,
Yep.
can you lower the volume on your phone? We're getting a little bit of feedback, so it might be one of the speakers,
Yep.
a microphone's interacting. Thanks.
Yeah, I got it. Oh, didn't. Okay. Here, I'm just going to get out of here. All right. So impression amplifiers are listed as the following. If you could go to the next slide, zoom in, that'd be great. Broadcasting, it basically is what it says it is. How do you get information out about your successes and the resources you have? Edison going to Scientific American was a great example of that. Using things like LinkedIn or having other people talk about your ideas, those are excellent ways to do it. It's excellent if you can get other people or other sources to broadcast your successes. It's obviously better than what we would call in America tooting your own horn, right? You don't want to be seen tooting your own horn. You want to get other people to broadcast your successes. So you need to find ways to do that. You want to signal. Signaling is about as another way to build credibility. When you get people who are known experts in a field endorsing your ideas, I mean, there's great examples of people getting high status individuals onto their boards or into their advisory boards or as investors. And for Mark Zuckerberg, once he landed Peter Thiel as an investor, that led to a lot of other investors, right? When you start to pull in people who are known as successful innovators or successful investors or experts into your orbit, and they start endorsing your idea and show a commitment to it, then that's going to have a ripple effect. Storytelling. We've talked a lot about storytelling here, right? It's not just putting your idea out there and talking about what your innovation does. It's telling a story that has meaning, right? And shows what your idea is going to do. Why does it have an emotional impact? So that's an important part of building or broadcasting your innovation capital. Materializing, I mean, other ways actually, and that one of the things that's great about this would be like prototyping something, showing people an example of your service or your product and how it works. Because once people can see something, they start to believe that it'll work. I mean, it might be a very new idea and very different, but if you can offer them a prototype, that's a way to materialize your idea. Comparing your idea to other ideas and saying, look, this is like, the invention of the steam train, or this is like the invention of the telephone. Show them how it's analogous to another invention and the social and technological impact that it'll have on people's lives once it's introduced. So that's an important part, comparing. And then committing, showing that you're committed to your idea is really important, that you're putting in your own money, you're putting in your own time. Once you commit to something, other people will feel more strongly about backing it. They know that you're actually spending a lot of time, energy, and resources on it. It's more likely that you'll get other people to join you in committing their resources. And similar to signaling, if you get other people to commit resources, show that I've raised $1 million in capital or $500,000 in capital or lira or, pounds, whatever, that's going to show people commitment. And then finally, you need to create a fear of missing out. We probably all know this. If I don't get in, you really want to be on the ground floor of this, because if you don't get in, you're going to miss the chance to, be famous, be part of something big, and learn a lot about the growth of a company or make a lot of money, right? I mean, I imagine that's something you do when you're creating an Amazon or a Facebook. If you don't throw in now with the founder and really show that you're dedicated to pushing their idea and making it successful, you might miss out and it might become a really big thing and you never were a part of it. And I want to say, along with that, it kind of fits with our discussion that we come back to again and again about failing forward. Successful innovators and inventors expect failure, right? And people who invest in innovators expect you to fail. Jeff Bezos says, when you ask him what he's doing, he says, I'm working on my next $1 billion failure, right? They know that they're going to, I mean, look at Alphabet, look, Google, right? The parent company of Google. Look at how many products they have launched and then withdrawn from the marketplace. Anybody remember Google Glass? Yeah, right. Google Glass. I mean, there's a lot of other things that they've introduced as services that you start using. I remember I had a Google search for my computer, which I actually loved and then they took it away. I mean, they make bets on things in innovative companies, and they know not every one of them is going to work out. So if you as an innovator make commitments, create a fear of missing out, even if some of your things fail, at least you've tried and you've learned from that failure. So it's important to try and make a commitment to trying and bringing other people behind you. So in a longer nutshell than I had anticipated because of technological reasons, which I apologize for, that is the book. I did want to raise an important question, and I'm really glad we have a diverse team at Wednesday Web Jam because Ximena was the one who raised this. She listened to this presentation yesterday and said, do you think everybody has the same ability to build innovation capital? And I think the answer is no, it's not equal. And Ximena, you had a discussion point that you wanted to bring up. I mean, it's specifically about women. And we at Design Thinkers Group have done some work on women's economic empowerment in other countries. And we see this realized in other countries like Colombia, where we've done some work. So is innovation capital equally accessible to everyone? I mean, I imagine it's accessible and you can all follow this book and look at ways to build innovation capital, but it might be harder for some. Ximena, you want to share that next slide?
Yes. So digging deeper upon what it happens to women, it's that, yeah, it seems like so easy that for men could be easier to show what they are doing, right, and build upon like the reputation and social and human capital. But like men tend to engage more in self-promotion than the women, for example. And then it's also like shown through the studies that we have to go like greater lengths to prove that we're competent, which for a man could be just easier, right? That they're excelling at something and doing well. And maybe they also can show and present what they've been doing successfully. While for women, it's been like proved that like 7 out of 10, they would just rather minimize their success and not tell them about them at all. And because we're women, we also face like different penalties for doing things that it will help others, you know, like show the like their success. So if we tend to have behaviors that are socialized as of men, I don't know if I'm using the correct words, then we get those penalties, right? While for a man, for men, right, they are like approved. Right. But if women show those behaviors, then there's this negative perception upon us. And there's like, interestingly, there's a like study called like self-promotion gap, and it tells more about it. So definitely I would say that, yeah, what would happen for women then to build as well their innovation capital, and what would others be willing to do, right? If you mentioned right now about, would you promote other women? Would you like, would you talk about the success that women are having and not only your own of men that we usually do?
Right.
So
I would, Ximena, to back that up, I would say that when we were doing a project in Colombia about women's access to commercial credit, one of the things we found through our partner, Pro Mujer, is that women's networks, I mean, you talk about your weak ties and strong social ties, women's networks are smaller than men's, which I thought sounded counterintuitive because my wife seems to have a lot of friends in a big network. So that's my personal experience is like, wow, you know a lot of people. But when it comes to business and jobs, men have these larger social networks. And obviously men are overrepresented, more represented than women in senior leadership positions, in investment positions and things like that. Well, we wanted to throw that out there as a provocative statement. I think a true statement, but to start the conversation, we only have a few more minutes for discussion. But there's going to be the backstage if anybody wants to join us for that to talk more about this. Anybody have any comments or questions about the innovation capital or the things we discussed?
I have a question. I
Yeah,
saw Michael is also off the mic. Michael, you want to share first?
Excuse me, what was that?
I saw you off the mic as well. So you off first. So do you want to share first before I ask? No?
No, he
Go,
doesn't.
Mikey.
Go ahead.
All right, sure.
Huh?
So I'm curious about, in terms of capital, there's innovation capital and there's the traditional capital, which is money, right? If we have both at the same time, the money, which is the normal, and the innovation capital, which circumstances would the innovation capital works better, and which circumstances would the traditional money works better?
Well, I mean, if you, I mean, the money I would imagine is quite important for getting resources, but you can have all the money in the world, and if you don't have innovation cap, let's just say I know a former high level, I know, and this is people you know too, there's examples of people who have a high profile who try to start something and they have the money to start it, but they don't have the reputation to recruit people to get it done, right? Like in tech, you know, it's hard to sometimes, or in other new areas, right? People are like, yeah, they don't have the reputation of doing that. I don't think I want to support that. Go ahead, Ezekiel.
Yeah, no, it reminds me of a story toward the end of the book of Elon Musk with his SpaceX company, and he couldn't, even though he's relatively well-resourced finance person, right? It's up and downs, but overall he does pretty well. But he couldn't get NASA to give him any attention or give him an opportunity to, to discuss like these reusable rockets that SpaceX was developing. So what he did is at a major event at a museum of airspace and space travel or something like that in Washington D.C., he had one of his rockets like trucked out, parked in front of the museum with spotlights. And so he just created like this big event to attract attention. And actually that was what he had to do to start to open up conversations with NASA who were not paying any attention to him. And the story starts with a previous billionaire who in the 90s had been investing a lot of money, like $200 million or something like that, in developing disposable rockets. And he just gave up around the year 2000 because he just could not get NASA to pay any attention to him. And Elon Musk founded SpaceX a few years later, and eventually did this big stunt basically to try to attract attention and open a conversation. So I think that's an instance where like having a lot of money wasn't helpful to really get attention for the innovation, but then he used the money to do a big stunt.
Yeah. So I think, Frankie, money is important, but if you're lacking that reputation for innovating in a specific area, I think it's going to still be hard to launch something, literally. And for those of you who don't know, NASA's our space agency in the US. Anybody else have a question or comment? I can't promise that I'll be able to answer all your questions. I only read the book. I don't think an innovation capital expert.
I can support what you were saying about the money part. Literally, I was doing things where I cost neutral, like I didn't have any money. could generate we had one connection who had another connection that fed the technology, the value that was coming in. Ultimately, it failed because of institutional, really like engagement and support. Great ideas, great things. Those things could in itself generate a whole new revenue stream and the money behind it. So then you have that. You have the great idea, you got the ability for the money, but then just no support. It just implodes on itself. Can't go anywhere.
There's a great quote. I think this is related to what you're saying, Michael, but there's a great quote from Machiavelli, and I'm gonna mangle it, but it's about like when you have a new idea, you will have kind of everybody who benefits from the current status quo will be against it and be your enemy. And the only people who are going to be in favor of it are like you, and you have to convince people that this is a new good thing, right? So if you're an innovator and you invent the newest great thing, you got a fair amount of people that you have to convince that it's worth investing in. Because if there's a new way of, I don't know, building the mousetrap, if you will, right? All the current mousetrap makers are not going to be interested in financing you, because they say, hey, look, there's dozens of other mousetraps out there. Why do we need another one?
They already work.
Yeah, they already work. So there's a lot of institutional, whether it's in a company or if you're doing it on your own, there's lots of obstacles to getting an idea launched. So I don't know if this, I feel like a lot of this book was kind of common sense, but it also rings true. And they've done a good effort, made a good effort at articulating these things and trying to measure these things. They do have a website called Innovators DNA, where you can pay to take, I think it's like $120, and you can take an innovation assessment of yourself, or you can sign up to have your team assessed. But I think these are skills that we need to have if we're going to help people and coach them about creating new ideas, prototyping, collaborating creatively together. I think it's very helpful to know about, how to name these things: social capital, human capital, reputation capital, to coach your clients or yourself about things you need to do to promote your ideas and gather resources.
With that, Steve, I think we just need to wind down and then transition to backstage.
Sure.
Is that good? All right,
Yeah.
folks. Well, join us next week for Wednesday Web Jam number 73, Scaling Design Thinking, with our very own Arna and Mimp. So tune in for that. I'm sure the email for next week's event will be coming out within the next day or two, as usual. So same place, same time. You can join us in the socials. We're in all the socials here that you can see on the slide, including Clubhouse. And Nupa is the crew member who's most involved in the Clubhouse. So you can always reach out to us and ask us about that. Of course, Wednesday Web Jam is brought to you by this group of lovely humans. It takes a big crew to get this running every week, 73 deep, starting next week. So this was officially number 72. So thank you, Steve, Jimena, and everybody else who makes Wednesday Web Jam possible. We also have expenses like the Zoom, MailChimp, etc. So if you want to buy us a coffee, it's about $3. These are payments processed by PayPal. You can scan the QR code, or Jimena, if you have the link, if you could kindly drop that link in the chat, that would be fantastic. And that just helps us cover expenses to keep Wednesday Web Jam running. You can point your phone to the QR code and it will pull up the website right up where you can donate $3 to help keep Wednesday Web Jam running. And finally, that is the end of our official programming. We're going to transition to the backstage. Let's stop recording